Thank you very much, Kevin, and welcome, Michael. It's great to be with you today.
Oh, delighted to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, I'll just say a few more words by way of introduction before we dive into today's conversation. Just to introduce you, so one of Australia's highest profile adolescent psychologists, and an author of 14 books. Is that the latest count? Possibly more by now, I'm not sure.
Roughly, yep, well
Yeah.
done.
Speaker, broadcaster. I'm sure a lot of people on the call today would have seen you on television and being interviewed. Mental health advocate as well, and you work in private practice in Melbourne and also up in Brisbane as well. And recipient of various awards, and particularly in your work in the prevention of youth suicide, and also been a resident psychologist for the morning show with Neil Mitchell on Radio 3RW for 12 years, I think it was, and also giving lots of talks in the community, particularly around things like grandparenting, and I want to find out more about what that is later on as well. How to build happy and resilient children, surviving year 7, surviving year 12. Maybe you could give a talk on surviving first year at university as well, because that's a bit of a challenge for many as well. So welcome, Michael. Couldn't think of anybody better to explore these issues today. So just to find out a little bit more about yourself, can you tell us what got you interested in adolescent psychology? How did you navigate your career to where you are now?
Well, it was an interesting thing. At the age of 18, I was diagnosed with a parotid tumor, malignant, on just one side, and I was told that I had about 8 weeks to live, and went through treatment at that time in Wellington, New Zealand, and I couldn't help noticing that the emphasis was very much on my disease rather than me as a young person. And so I thought that if I ever did recover and survive, I'd explore that. And I ended up doing my PhD sitting on a pediatric oncology ward at what was then the Prince of Wales Children's Hospital in Randwick. And out of that, I formed an organisation called Canteen, a support group for kids with cancer. And after I did that for a while, death and dying had delighted me enough. So I moved on to adolescent psychology, got into suicide, in particular, suicide prevention. And now I'm particularly interested in technology and the good, the bad, and the ugly of that.
Yeah, well, it's I mean that's quite something at that age to have that experience. Clearly, a very formative experience, and it's not unusual that formative experiences for ourselves set directions for careers and lives. I didn't realize you're a New Zealander as well. Are you
Well,
another?
my father was actually a British diplomat. So I was born in Melbourne. My
Mm,
brother was born in Pakistan. My sister in New York, and we moved all over the world. I did do a stint in New Zealand where my father was posted, and that's where I
mm,
got unwell. But I did the rest of my tertiary training in Australia.
yeah. So, in terms of, you've pointed to a number of things, dealing, with your own challenges, etc. What would you say really makes your work most meaningful for you? Because, working with mental health issues every day and so on, many people say it can be enormously challenging, but I mean, you're so passionate about your work. What is it that makes it meaningful? How do you sustain yourself in dealing with those, helping people with those challenges every day?
Well, I think it won't come as a surprise to you that I'm a meditator, so that certainly helps. But I also am a perennial optimist. I have very much a growth mindset, and I where we see problems, we also see solutions. And I think because I've been around for a bit, my son referred to me recently as heritage listed, which I think is a compliment. I've seen a lot, and therefore I think I can bring a bit of experience to my clinical work. And of course, I'm still learning every day. I'm about to go to the American Psychological Association meeting in Denver, Colorado, assuming I get into America. But again, so much research, so much new information, particularly in treating trauma and conditions like ADHD, which I see lots of. So everything's so exciting at the moment. There's so many wonderful things to explore, and I'm just by nature a very curious person.
Yeah, wonderful. Heritage listed. You haven't got a plaque put on you somewhere, have you? But
I think he's preparing one.
yes. The Lancet Commission on Mental Health reported last year that mental health issues were the leading health issue impacting the lives of young people in developed countries. And national figures in Australia pretty much reflect the same kind of thing. So, large report from 2020 to 2022 data found about 50% increase in mental health disorders in people aged 16 to 24 since 2007, and a prevalence now of about 39% across the board, but including about 50% of young women reporting having significant mental health issues. All of this has got to be very, very, concerning. Clearly, what is going on? What is this escalation about? Is this just a very temporary thing that'll change, or is this a trend you think that will keep going? Because it's got to be a concern for us all.
Well, it should be a concern for us all because while young people are just 20% of the population, they're 100% of the future. And therefore, we need to invest in their well-being. So I think there's a lot going on. Well, first of all, adolescence itself has changed from when you and I, even I'm assuming when you trained, Craig, you would have remembered that adolescence back then was kind of regarded as 13 to 19. Well, Professor Susan Sawyer, a very distinguished adolescent medicine expert I think it was 2018, wrote an article for The Lancet changing the definition of adolescence to 10 to 24, which I think does reflect what's happening now. First of all, young people were hitting puberty a lot earlier, and I think the cost of living has meant that they haven't been able to leave home. So it's still a time of great vulnerability. It's a time when they want autonomy and independence, yet have to work very, very hard to get it. I think there are a bunch of risk factors in the journey from childhood through to young adulthood, which weren't present when you and I were growing up. Most notably, the absolutely terrible idea of replacing a play-based childhood with a screen-based childhood. I think that's been a disaster, and I think it's contributed to the observations that you've made. That, of course, includes social media, which I have very strong feelings about. But I also think that there's increased recognition of problems which formerly perhaps we ignored. So that's a good factor. We're picking up these young people where previously perhaps we didn't. But the biggest problem, of course, is resources, and that is that there are not enough adolescent psychologists to go around, not enough pediatricians, not enough psychiatrists. So while the figures do seem to be getting worse, our capacity to service these figures is really desperate now.
Mm. I've often said in healthcare, having a medical background, that in terms of chronic illness, we spend so much time in treating and very little time and resources in preventing chronic illness. Is it the same with mental health issues for young people, that we have to have, and this has been in the media a lot, even today, talking about how few beds there are, for kids who might need admission. Um, so resourcing is an issue. But is there also an emphasis here that more attention needs to go on prevention? What do we need to do to help kids, stop getting to points where got significant mental health issues?
Yeah, well, I see myself as a rather expensive ambulance at the bottom of a cliff. And obviously, what we need to do is invest in the fence at the top. And prevention isn't sexy. And as a political lobbyist of many years standing, I know that the politicians, sadly, are always going to go for the 15 seconds of fame cutting a ribbon at a headspace rather than investing in good social and emotional competencies, mindfulness, meditation, really starting in primary school to give kids the skills, the knowledge, and the strategies to manage life. Things as simple as anger management, problem solving, decision making, conflict resolution skills. Um, and mindfulness. This is, to me, the great tragedy. And they're marvelous programs like Smiling Minds program, which is a charity that I was on the board of. I'm not now, but Frank Oberklade's been very heavily involved with them, Professor Oberklade from the Royal Children's Hospital. And, that's about teaching teachers how to teach the sort of stuff that you and I know would really make a huge difference to the psychological trajectory of these kids. So I'm not sure if you've got the secret of how we can get politicians to slice that pie a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, in medicine, it's about 1.5% of the health budget on prevention, about 98.5% on treatment. And so just a shift of a 1 or 2% on prevention can save far, far more. So I might elect myself Minister for Health, and I'll invest you with a position that you can just have open budget to do whatever you think needs to be done. Because yeah, it's I'm not sure we've got the emphasis right yet.
Well,
You
we haven't, and the return on investment, as you know, is very good. Look, we've been in a sort of an apartheid health system ever since I can remember, and that is that if I had, chest pain right now, and fell to the floor with a cardiac issue, I would be rushed to hospital and receive 21st century cardiac care immediately. If I slowly develop a psychological problem, good luck.
Mm,
It's really very, very, the contrast is so clear to me.
yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean that's sort of the double thing, isn't it? The physical often gets so much more attention than the psychological and emotional, but I mean the two are so much interrelated. So with this sort of escalation in recent decades, is that something, going back to the start of your career, that you could see coming, or is it kind of really caught you by surprise a bit as well? Like, when did you twig,
I think the 2007 was the year that they released the iPhone. And I think smartphones began to change a little bit. It's quite interesting if you look at Gen Z as being, children born, they're about 13 to 28 now, that generation. They do remember pre-streaming, pre-TikTok, and they had to adapt to technology. Gen Alpha, who are the kids born 2013 and onwards, the ones in primary school now, they're born into this always on AI assisted world. They won't remember life without touch screens or digital learning. Um, are growing up, I think, significantly disadvantaged as a result.
Yes. Because the more time on screens, the more it replaces other things that would be so much a normal part of life. I remember Michael Resnick back in the 90s, late 90s, published a very big study on 100,000 young people in the US, and they're looking at the protective factors. A whole bunch of risk factors, but protective factors. The most protective factor was connectedness at home or at school. So that was most protective, and the most protective time they found when they looked at all different times in the day, was it being at home for the kids when they got back from school or whatever, was the evening meal. And you're saying about technology and how technology's just changed things like how people have meals, whether people actually sit around a table and talk to each other. I mean, the technology's changed massively, not just how we relate to others, but also how we relate to ourselves.
Well, such a good point. I did an interview yesterday in response to new research which was released that the number of parents reading to their children at bedtime had fallen to an all-time low. And, this is vital to their emotional literacy, to their literacy skills, to their imagination. And it's so sad that there are some companies now who are providing a service to parents where you just give a sample of your voice, and it then through AI creates a sound file where you're reading a book to your child through a computer. And I'm just thinking, I'm quite sure that that's not going to be as good as the face-to-face skipping 5 pages and moving on, which is what we all used to do.
Just so that you could get to bed.
Yes.
Do we have to go through War and Peace again tonight? I know you're ahead of your reading age, but can we just do something? So anyway, so resilient children, building healthy and happy and resilient children is a very big part of your interest. Let's look at each of those, and I'm not sure how different they are, like resilient and happy, because they're probably intimately related. What goes into helping to build resilient kids?
Well, I define resilience as the capacity to face, overcome, be transformed, and strengthened by adversity. And I think that's very important in 2025 because there is so much adversity, so much disappointment that the kids are facing. And there's a parenting piece there around disappointment, which I'll talk about in a sec. But so resilience, the research is quite clear that there are a couple of components that we can see every time we look at the research of resilient kids. And the original research goes back to Professor Emmy Werner's research on the island of Kauai, which is the northmost island in Hawaii. And she chose this particular island because there was a lot of adversity there. There was high levels of drug and alcohol problems, high levels of unemployment, lots of domestic violence. It really was not a great place to grow up. And she followed a bunch of kids through for 40 years. And what she discovered is 1/3 of those kids supervened their circumstances of pervasive adversity, and the other 2/3 sort of crashed and burnt. And what was so interesting is she identified 5 characteristics in the ones that made it. The first was that they all had this connectedness that you talked about earlier, this charismatic adult in their lives, someone who made them feel safe and valued and listened to. That was the first thing. The second thing is they all had islands of competence. That is, they found something that they loved doing, and it might have been art or music or dance or drama or sport. The third thing is that they all had very optimistic self-talk, in that they would always say, well, I haven't done this yet. Or they had this amazing capacity to see life as it was, but to recognize that there were always good things to look for the positive. And this was an amazing finding. The other two things that they found was a high level of social emotional competencies, which I talked about earlier, and interestingly, something that Resnick has talked to me about on a couple of occasions, which was spirituality, this sense of connectedness to something or someone that transcends the material world, feeling part of something that was bigger than you. And I worry sometimes with the kids that I see that they're spiritual anorexics. They don't believe in anything. And there's no sense of belonging. And I think this is potentially hugely problematic for the future.
The grand narratives are shrinking more and more in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and that the happiness component is a bit different. That comes very much from Marty Seligman's work in positive psychology. And Marty never liked the word happy. He didn't like it as a happyology, but really living a fulfilled life where you can flourish. And there are, of course, there is a huge literature on the components of that too. So I think when I talk to parents, part of it is the science of resilience, the science of positive psychology, but also parenting. 90% of parenting is showing up and then knowing the sort of understanding a developmental perspective, understanding that these kids have 86 billion brain cells and they're not all wired up yet. And therefore, you have to have a developmental perspective. You need to choose your battlegrounds, and, fighting over untidy rooms is really not one of those hills that I think you need to die on.
It wasn't one of those things found in that previous study was having a tidy room was the most important thing for building resilience.
No.
Yes. So these days, I mean, there's all sorts of terms like helicopter parenting and a lot of concern about, I mean, obviously protecting children from harm, like child protection, very important thing, but we use protecting in a different kind of sense of being putting kids in sort of cotton wool and trying to minimize challenges or risks. I mean, the kind of risks that used to be, normal part of growing up and play, etc., probably quite uncommon these days. Can you say something about finding that kind of right balance or measure about kids being challenged, being extended, being the value of being outside of your comfort zone and the potential problems of trying to keep too tight a rein, so that not experiencing anything fine, uncomfortable or challenging or whatever, as if that's going to keep a child happy. So where are the boundaries there? How does a parent kind of find that right balance?
Great question. Well, first of all, I think disappointment is a practice lap for adulthood. So if you actually haven't been taught how to deal with it, when it comes to adulthood, you're really going to be in a lot of trouble if you've never had the experience or help in dealing with disappointment. And I think there are a lot of parents, and the latest term, by the way, is concierge parenting, where you literally can imagine sitting behind a desk just waiting to fulfill every request that's made for you. And clearly, that doesn't allow young people to experience failure. And fail stands for the first attempt in learning. That's really important. And as a result, they never develop the skills to deal with routine disappointments. And look, there's a lot of parents, and they're doing it. They're coming from a good space. Don't get me wrong. They love their children. They want to protect them in the real sense of we don't want them to have any sadness or disappointment in their life. And of course, that's not going to help their development. They need, when they're disappointed, they need to have a space where they can say that they're disappointed, allow them to vent. Someone needs to validate those feelings. Yes, that is terribly disappointing. And then reframe it for them and say, well, what could we do differently? What have we learned from this? What will we do next time? And I think that narrative is very, very important. Uh, the thing that's made it a little bit trickier now, I think, is that many parents, particularly with the news of this week, the devastating news this week of what happened in the childcare industry, that's just ratcheted up their level of fear around the big wide world, and it really isn't what we needed.
Is one of the other factors as well, like with social media, so much is about getting likes or approval, or that's one of the things is that it seems to really generate, that feeds into some of the mental health problems associated with it, is this constant seeking of approval, and seeking validation through that the whole time. So it makes failure, dealing with failure, um, in some ways a very challenging thing when it's all out there on social media, and the desire to be seen in a certain way. I mean, previous generations never had that. I mean, maybe something didn't go well at school or in sport or whatever. You had your few close friends, you talked about it and so on. But these days, it's kind of all out there so much. So what role is social media and social comparison and so on got in helping kids to learn and grow through failure and adversity?
Well, it's very significant. There's this thing I call the compare and despair phenomenon, because what happens is the young people are exposed, the young people on social media, which is about 99% of them, they're exposed to the highlight reels of other people's lives presented as normal. And as a result, they've sort of got their nose pressed up against the glass, looking through this glass at what appears to be reality when it's not. And the algorithms are designed to give them more and more and more of what they click on. So it becomes an echo chamber, and it's a disaster. They end up feeling so inadequate, not only body image, but also the wealth, the things that are portrayed on social media, which they wouldn't have a hope in hell of ever having. That becomes very emotionally charged. And, I think the Prime Minister's endeavour to take on the social media companies is admirable. He's the first person in the world, we will be the first person in the world to instigate this delay in access to social media, and that'll happen in December this year. They chose the age of 16 as the age which you can access this. I thought 13 might have been better because I think it's more doable, and it would bring us in line with the American Child Online Privacy Protection Act, which is also 13. But the Prime Minister's decided to go for 16. And I think, to me, the message is the important thing, that parents need to know that, being on TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat is associated. If you're on for 3 hours or more, research came out today, 3 hours or more, it's associated with worse mental health. And I think this is a good message to give parents. And it was one of the reasons why I was so thrilled to be involved in the banning of mobile phones in schools from first bell to last, which I consider to be one of the most sensible policy decisions that the Australian governments have made over the last 5 years.
Yes, I always found it surprising there was ever any debate about that. As we were chatting before the session today, I've often said to teachers, if those phones are in the room, your teaching has got to be a whole lot more addictive than that phone, because otherwise, you know where the attention's going to be, and that's not on what you're trying to teach the kids. And so I was surprised there was ever a debate about that.
Oh, and there was a huge debate. There were a lot of people who referred to those of us who are pushing this as Luddites, etc. What's so interesting is the research following the ban has shown three things, which I think your viewers might find interesting. One is there's an improvement in academic performance, which is not surprising. there's a reduction in distraction, and there's a increase in the sound levels at recess and lunchtime because people are actually having to talk with one another and play rather than stare at screens. So who knew?
Hmm. Yes, well, that's certainly the reports from some of the schools who did this before that ban came in. Um, One of the other things too is I remember seeing one study looking at narcissism, and particularly visual forms of social media seem to increase this sort of sense of narcissism. Um, what happens with, like, is there a way around that? And I suppose thinking also, like, for parents, this is a sort of a related question. What are the best guidelines for parents, for kids who have already pretty much hooked into the social media and screens the whole time, or kids that are much younger who are not yet? Like, what kinds of guidelines do you think are best for parents to consider?
Well, fortunately, the e-safety commissioner, Julian Grant, has a fantastic website which she constantly updates, she and her staff, which gives parents a lot of really good advice on, for example, creating a social media contract which young people can sign and then they can stick to. It also gives parents wonderful advice on which software programs to use. And there's something beautiful about, having an agreement with a young person that at a particular time, the phone gets switched off and, you can invest in sleep. What's happened is with phones and social media, sleep has gone just absolutely off the agenda. And as a physician, how important sleep is to the physical, let alone psychological well-being of young people. And that sleep deprivation thing cannot be ignored. It is massive. I have never seen in my career so many young people with profound sleep disturbance. The second thing it's done is it's reduced the academic performance of a lot of these young people because they're staying up late at night watching whatever they're watching, and they're not doing the work that they need to be doing. And the last thing is, of course, it causes enormous family conflict because parents are beside themselves around what they regard as an addiction to these platforms. So the guidance I have is that you have to set it up, the rules very early on, and you have to stick to them, and you aren't there to be popular. There's a wonderful concept of vitamin N, which is no. And you're more than welcome to give one explanation, but you're not required to give multiple explanations. It's your house, your rules. And I think if you follow the guidelines that have been set by Julian Grant and the eSafety Commission, you can't go wrong. But I think it is about being very proactive as a parent, and surely one of the greatest challenges now in modern parenting.
Yes, and I suspect that just saying no, can't do that is a real, excuse me, an importance to find other things of real value that it can be replaced with.
Well, while kids are doing one thing, they can't be doing another. One of the key things that I look for in young people is that they have something that gets them up in the morning. The great psychologist Steve Biddulph used to call this the spark. And I think whenever I see a 10-year-old, the thing I'm looking for is, do they have one thing which isn't, Minecraft or screen related, that they love doing. And this is where, of course, sports comes in. We know the value of sport, but for some young people who aren't interested in team sports, there are other things as well. But having that island of competence, having that spark, I think really can make all the difference. And having parents really being enthusiastic and pushing that, it's an important part of parenting in 2025.
Yeah. Uh, One thing before we'll be taking some questions shortly, if you're happy to do that, Michael, but is grandparenting. And is that parenting with theatrical costumes and grand flourishes, or is it something else? What is grandparenting?
Well, grandparenting is actually the title of my latest book, and I wrote it because the interesting demographic changes in Australia mean that grandparents are living much longer than ever before, and family sizes are shrinking. So the ratio of grandparents to grandchildren is getting greater. And I saw this as a wonderful opportunity to introduce another charismatic adult into the lives of young people. And it turns out that being a grandparent is something of an epiphany. The grandparents that I researched said to me that they had discovered that the love they felt for their child was eclipsed, in fact, and they never thought it would be, by the love that they feel for their grandchild. And this isn't in all cases, but in a lot of cases, that bond was incredibly special. So I think the art of grandparenting is something that we need to put more research into. But it's interesting, grandparents are now the leading provider of unpaid childcare in Australia. So I think that affords us an opportunity and skilling up grandparents around basic things like play and putting that iPad or that phone to bed when it comes around. So I'm actually encouraging grandparents to have a little kind of knitted bed which they can put the device in because it needs to rest too. The idea of playing games, board games, gardening, kicking a ball around, all the wonderful things that grandparents can do to build that relationship. I really think that's our great hope for 2025 and beyond.
Well, I certainly think back in my own life and how important grandparents were, and how seeing grandparents on a very regular basis, not necessarily in child-minding sort of sense, but more just in a regular part of family life. But it was a very different, and I suspect for a lot of parents these days, tired, get back from work and everything else, like it's it's more challenging in some ways to find the time to really engage. But grandparents often had that time. One of the things I found often is an interesting comment from people when teaching the mindfulness and saying one of the things about being mindful at work is all right, but being mindful when getting home and just being aware of, like, for a parent to go to that screen, but just realizing, wait a second, when the child comes up, to actually really be present, really engage with the child. And the interesting thing is that that's often a lot less exhausting than kind of a half interaction while on the screen kind of thing, just really engaging fully. So that sort of mindful parenting seems to be very important.
Yeah, you got to be present.
Yeah. Now, Kevin, have we got some questions on the Q&A?
Have we got some questions? We have a lot of questions here, and I'll do my best to get to them. And there's some really good ones here. And I thought I'd just start off with one because it seemed maybe like pertinent to many people, probably could find resonance with it. And somebody that's just anonymous actually asked, well, this, it's not a new issue, but the challenge of restricting screen time for kids is so hard, and for obviously for many different reasons. They're saying they're happy to restrict it, but they find that the main challenge is being that their kids miss out on social interaction with their friends. And even if they have friends over at the house, they can struggle because the other kids are used to screen time. And so this person asked, I know it's a complex problem, but any tips on finding the right balance so my kids don't miss out on the social benefits of social media?
Yeah, and I think we know what a great question. Can I just say the greatest predictor of well-being in young people who are neurotypical is actually having a rich repertoire of friends. And in 2025, that can be online or offline. And there's nothing wrong with a little bit of gameplay after school online with mates. That's fine. It's trying to find that balance between the social component, which I've said is crucial, and the other family time the academic time. And this to me is about negotiating from a very early age about what is fair and reasonable. And again, I refer the anonymous person to the e-safety commissioner's website, because it's got some fantastic advice about how to do that, particularly setting up the contract early.
Great stuff. Nice stuff. So the next question comes from Juliana, and I'll shorten it a little bit because it has some sort of personal stuff in here. And so Juliana asks us, what do you do when your child refuses to go to any further counseling because they don't see the value in it? What resources would you recommend as a parent that I can draw from that is in ways to better support my 15-year-old teenage son? There's been some issues around the home at the moment. And you know, sometimes this has impacts on the family dynamics, and at times their relationship can be quite tense, as you know, the younger son, he lives at home. So yeah, any kind of advice, insights on something, you know, having to deal with these very sort of tough situational issues at home?
Sure. It's not at all unusual for young people to not want to sit in a room with some heritage listed dude like me. But what we do have now is a lot of really fantastic online therapies. The ANU, for example, has created a fantastic cognitive behavioral therapy program called MOODGYM. Created a treatment, again, cognitive behavioral therapy, a little bit of ACT thrown in as well, called the BRAVE program. And the BRAVE program has a primary school component, secondary school component, and a parent program as well. So I think, you know, the internet isn't all bad, particularly for people in rural and remote communities. These are lifelines, and I use them between sessions for my clients. There are also a bunch of apps which I recommend, including Smiling Mind for meditation. But if you've got a young person who is behaviorally challenging and they don't want to come and see someone, a great place to start is for you to come and see someone. And you can sit down and describe to the clinician what's going on, and they may well have some helpful suggestions. So never give up. There's always something that can be done.
Great stuff. So there's a question here now that relates to your grandparenting thesis. I'll try to shorten it a little bit. So the question is like, does the research and implementation of healing from ancestral and community trauma have any effect or potential on how youngsters cope with life in general, and understanding and values and finding sources of comfort? And furthermore, just to add on to that a little bit, it's like sometimes we maybe overlook the role of grandparents. And so we maybe in some way we're making younger people miss out on something that is very, very important, a source of culture. And so how do we as a society provide role models of whole, wise, loving, caring, discerning, spiritually aware human beings that are good role models? And this was from Elizabeth, if I didn't say that before.
Well, Elizabeth, what a great question. And all I can say to you is that there are some key fundamental roles that I think the people in my position as a potential grandparent and an actual grandparent can do. And one is to talk about their past, to talk about their history, to give the young people a sense of where they've come from, to instill the values, the attitudes, the beliefs that have basically sustained those people, and that can be passed on. Part of that is, one, having a family tree; two, going and visiting the ancestors ancestral places with your grandchildren so that they do live and breathe the history. And I think the research is very clear that if you have a good relationship with your grandchild, the Berlin aging study said you live an extra 5 years, 5 years. So you're going to benefit. But of course, there's a litany of advantages psychologically in children for having a great relationship with their grandparents, which cover the academic, the psychological, and the social. So the research is very, very clear that everybody benefits from a great relationship, a grandparenting relationship. It's not to say that it's not without its difficulties. And in doing the research, there are a couple of scenarios where one grandparent had taken their grandchild out while they were in their care for their first ever haircut. And that really violated a code. You don't do that. Feeding the child food that the parents don't agree with. I mean, I've created in the book a grandparenting code. So if anyone wants to have a look at it, it's in there. But those represent violations.
I wish my grandparents had maybe read the code then, because they dragged me to some strange and not so fun things when I was a kid.
No, I got a few ice creams, I've got to say, probably more than my parents would have liked when I was that age.
It's part of the role of a grandparent. You got to spoil a little bit, but anyway, I'll leave it up to the experts. Look, there's probably time for one quick question, one more quick question, and this is probably a nice one to finish it off. Nicole asks, "Hi, Michael. I love the work you do as a teacher and as a parent, and I know your children are older now, but let's wind back the clock a few years. What would you put in place as a parent with your children and the phones and social media that you would do differently now?"
Well, I was very lucky because I escaped the kind of great rush in 2007. My son actually left school in 2008, so I didn't have to deal with social media. But if I had done it, I'll tell you exactly what I've done. There's a thing that I think all parents should look at called the eSmart digital license. Some of you are old enough to remember pen licenses at school. This is something that's been created by the Alana and Madeline Foundation, and it's literally a test that they pass online. There's a primary school one and a secondary school one. My belief is that we would benefit enormously in making sure that child before they go to school, primary, because it gives them the skills and the knowledge in a safe, smart, responsible way. That's what I would, and that's what I'm recommending now.
Wonderful.
Sounds like great recommendations and very, very practical as well. Okay, so with that, we're at the end of the session. Really, really like to thank Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg for today. It's been really insightful. I don't have children. I'll never have children, but I actually found it very, very interesting as well. Really like to thank you for coming today on behalf of M3CS, and thank you, Craig, for facilitating the session. So we have these sessions the first Thursday of every month. So be sure to sign up for the newsletter to let you know what's coming up in M3CS. Really like to thank you all, and I think with that, that's probably it. So thank you all both again.